thank you for coming on. I'm really excited. Can you maybe give a quick kind of like bio, who you are and what you're about, just so that people who don't know you, don't follow you online or anything like that, kind of have a rough idea of who this is that they're listening to?
Yeah. Honestly, like in terms of my deconstruction online, I guess that's a pretty recent thing. Um, but it's been happening probably since I started following you. Not just because of
I'm
you, but a
sorry.
lot of things. Yeah, no, you're good. And like for me, like I guess my background is sort of weird that I came from like Hinduism in high school, and
Right.
that's pretty much how I was raised with my family. Like I was born in India. We came here when I was the States. I'm in Colorado now. We came here when I was 5.
Okay.
Um, so I still am pretty close to that culture and still fluent in the language and
Right.
still, yeah. And only recently have I been going back to a lot more of that and relearning a lot of that
Mm,
and the meaning behind a lot of what I was taught. Because with my family, I was taught more of the rituals, but not really the meaning behind anything of what we
sure.
were doing or why we believe what we believe. But I guess that's true in everything,
It can
every
be for
faith.
sure, right? Yeah.
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 Yeah. So from Hinduism, I was in high school, and I guess in my high school, we were studying some sort of like earth science. I think we were dealing with plate tectonics or something. And
Okay.
I met this girl she was doing really well in the class. And it was the one class I wasn't doing very well in. And she ended up wanting to help me, with the subject because I
Okay.
wasn't doing so well. And I was open to it because I wanted to have a better grade. I'm young, right? So,
Right.
um, and that's kind of what's expected of me from my family and some of my culture too, to do better.
Mm,
But she definitely used it as an opportunity, and she's still a good friend of mine. But
awesome.
since then, I guess, moved away from a lot of that.
Right.
But yeah, it ended up being like a study night at her house, and she ended up talking about she randomly brought up God and Jesus and the cross, and I was pretty interested, and
Mm,
I guess I got into faith because of, I guess, apologetics, which is something she was more heavy into.
okay.
And I guess in the last 5, 6 years got out of some of that. Like that
Right.
was in 2009, and then in 2015, I would say I got out of some of that once I started reading more things, I guess, in context and realizing how relevant that was. And it's like, started having these questions of like, how much can you read in context without the Bible being like a mess? How
Right. Yeah.
far is
Once you
too
dig
far?
deep, it becomes really confusing for sure. And you start
Right,
to realize this
right.
isn't as black and white. So were you always really, like a lot of people that are into apologetics, like to kind of line everything up, very intellectual approach to faith, things like that. Would that be fair to say of like how you were engaging with faith was very intellectual or
Um,
not? Or,
I think initially, and sometimes that's still very much a part of me. But I would say I think, you came from a similar group at a certain point, like Bethel.
okay.
So
Yeah.
in some ways I became more involved in that kind of charismatic group
Sure.
too,
Very
like later on in
experiential.
my faith. Yeah, I went from like a Bible church teaching to a little more Calvinist to diving way out of that into more charismatic faith,
Mm,
and then slowly started realizing, hey, like I'm reading more and more in context, and like the Bible just isn't, it doesn't sit as well with me as it used to if I want to be
right.
faithful to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been through like a lot of stages of change, right?
Yeah.
From Hinduism, kind of Bible believing, kind of maybe evangelical kind of style into like kind of quite Calvinistic into Bethel. Like these are all, I guess, religions,
Yeah.
fairly can be quite black and white religions, but quite a bit of change along the way. And so how did you find that in your process? Did you find yourself being feeling quite destabilized, or did you like find that you kind of take that in your strides, these kind of changes of where you were at and what you believed?
Well, I guess the way I was taught in faith, and I guess it does help to have some of the apologetics, and the way
Mm,
my parents were always dealing with religion too was, even though they had the rituals in their faith for a long time, like they still taught me to like think for myself.
right.
I think the biggest fear they had when I said I got saved was, that I was being brainwashed. And as a kid, I didn't think I was. I thought
Right.
I was making my own decisions. But in a lot of ways, I came to realize now, like, okay, there was some of that, not actual, I don't know, not necessarily what we think of as brainwashing, but I guess there's definitely some deprogramming that happens that you're just supposed to
Mm,
take it by faith, and you start to adapt some pretty unhealthy things and stop questioning certain things, because you're just taking things by faith.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't know if I answered your
No, no,
question.
it's interesting. Yeah, I'm just trying to get a picture of like who is this kid that's growing up and going through these kind of stages, and because it's a weird dynamic when you grow up in a faith, and I guess you have quite a unique perspective in that you grew up in one faith and then kind of you transplanted yourself out of that into a different faith, kind of outside of
Mhm.
your parents' tradition and things like that. And so I guess you had the opportunity at very impressionable ages. So because you became Christian
I
in your
was
kind of teens, right?
15.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
So
15, and it was
still
from 14
very
to 15, yeah.
your brain is still, like a sponge, at that
Yeah,
kind of
very
age.
malleable.
And so in both those religions, you are being introduced to them when you're very, susceptible to maybe like brainwashing feels like a very harsh term, but
Yeah.
ultimately anytime you're kind of trying to teach a child absolutes, and it can feel quite like, well, we could teach them different absolutes, and who's to say which ones, like it's a bit
Yeah.
of an odd scenario. But I guess, yeah, growing up in those kind of two different religions and having them kind of fed to you, did did you did you completely reject kind of your tradition when you went into Christianity? Because Christianity is not a fan of Hinduism, right? I mean, we would use that as a, oh,
No.
that's demonic or evil or
Yeah,
all
yeah,
sorts of,
the word pagan was used a lot, I think, when
right,
I started coming into the faith. And honestly, I think because I was um in America too, I think it just felt easier to think this is westernized and this is advanced and this is, objective versus like, that was just a myth versus we don't talk about the
right.
myths that are in Christianity and in the Bible, right?
Yeah. No,
So,
absolutely. This kind of like elitism of like, oh, but we're the advanced,
right,
whatever white patriarchal
right.
nation, but
Right.
like
And
we
my
are the
parents pretty much
next.
thought of it as colonization. And honestly, like
Mm,
in some ways it is colonization. I think
yeah.
of like basically writing off what you used to be and what you used to believe as wrong and demonic and pagan and nothing good about it and God can't be
Yeah.
part of it. Yeah.
Did you find there, because it must be quite hard. I'm not massively familiar with Hinduism. I've done a little bit of reading, but it's definitely not one of the ones that grabbed me and I went deep in. Like it just
Right.
didn't click. And so I don't know a lot about it. But I, from my understanding, not unlike Christianity and America, Hinduism and Indian culture is quite conflated at times as well. Did you find potentially there being a problem of like your faith and your youth group, your teachers kind of demonizing that part of your past, also on some level demonizing your background as a Indian
I
person? Yeah.
remember I remember being in high school and like at this point I was pretty much saved, like I was pretty deep into the Bible and hanging out with those group of people and whatnot. I remember being in high school and being in a history class, and like a lot of what we learned about when, um, like when the British were in India was to basically get rid of things like sati, like widow burning. Like I only heard about the bad stuff, like that was
Right.
associated with Hinduism and Indian culture. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, like I must be on the right path, if
Yeah. Thank God
if
for the
I'm moving
Brits,
away from this. Yeah, thank God, for the white savior.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, like did you pick up on that in your Christianity as well, though? Was there any kind of component of that? Or was it, maybe it wasn't? I mean, I don't know if it is explicitly overt in most Christians. I know a lot of our kind of white supremacy, I know it's a loaded word for a lot of people that freak out with stuff like that, but like, that culture, that viewing culture through that white lens, that can be very subtle. And I guess as well, growing up, maybe that might not have been as obvious, or maybe not as influential in the churches you were growing up in. But did that come across at all? Did you feel that there was an element of you had to reject part of your personal heritage to be this good
Well,
Christian, like not just the Hinduism, but like, any other kind of components and things. I'm just so fascinated by just how black and white, even American Christianity, it could demonize me as a European, just having some
hmm.
European views of like,
Oh
some
yeah,
liberal socialist views or whatever, it's like,
right,
well, you can't be a Christian and believe
right.
that,
Because
I'm like,
Christianity has to look like
oh,
Ronald Reagan, right?
exactly, right. Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah.
Was that, but maybe it wasn't. I mean, I guess 15 as well as probably a fairly innocent age as well. Maybe that wasn't
Right.
as
I
much on your
mean,
radar.
to be totally fair, like none of the churches I was in like intentionally or personally hurt
Mm,
me in that kind of way. I
that's
would just
great.
say like now I'm kind of learning like okay, there were like some micro things that maybe I could have paid attention to like now looking back, I learned that the church that I used to be part of that I first, got saved at or whatever, like I'm learning like wow, there's a lot of abuse, like certain people like pedophiles were allowed to stay in,
Wow.
youth leadership. Yeah, things like that I'm like, yeah, I guess I brushed a lot of it off because I was taught to do that, you
Mm,
know.
yeah,
But I'm still kind of, I guess, pulling some of that stuff out that I don't remember super well.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Looking back on
absolutely.
old
And
journals.
maybe that is and sometimes we can almost need to hunt for something that wasn't massively there as well. So, because I know that it's not necessarily that every church in, America or Europe or,
Right.
it's not always as big a deal in one church as it is in another and different components of that.
Right.
But
And I was pretty
yeah,
good about I don't know, because once I became saved or whatever, my parents were pretty adamant about me not necessarily going all in to church.
mm,
So like I only caught glimpses of certain things in high school, but in college once I was, living on my own, I went like all in when it came to campus ministries and
right,
churches and things like that. But in high school it was a lot harder to see it because I was barely there. I was basically listening to sermons online. I would hang out with the
right.
youth group at my school cafeteria, not like in the church as much. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So, what did you do at university?
University, I studied economics and then I got my MBA in project management.
Oh, wow. Okay. Cool. And is that
So
where you
businessy.
Yeah, and is that where you're at now? Like you're kind of in that kind of using that economics business kind of
I
stuff or
am. I am. And I like it. And it's still something I'm like learning how to use my project management degree because before I wasn't using it at all initially in my job. And
right.
then certain things changed at my job where now I can use it more and I'm
That's
being
awesome.
trained to use it more. So that's cool.
Nice. You're
Yeah.
you're one of the few that managed to get employed with some relevance to their, their degree,
I
this
know
world we
people
live
keep
in right
saying
now.
that. I'm like, that's crazy that that's not normal. I mean, you
It
put
is
all this
crazy,
money
isn't
into a
it?
degree.
Yeah, it's a weird world we live in for sure. But yeah, I don't know. It's definitely
It
becoming more and more the norm, isn't it? So
is.
yeah.
I'm finding out I'm an anomaly.
Wow. So
Yeah.
when did things start to unravel? Like, so you mentioned the kind of last kind of hop along this journey was kind of like charismatic Bethany, that kind of world. Were you in that kind of mindset, that kind of faith tradition when you started to deconstruct?
Yeah, basically from I guess in a lot of ways Bethel sort of helped me, even though like I
Mm,
don't agree with everything they teach now.
yeah.
Um like once they started talking about women in ministry and like basically deconstructing that out of, what church has typically taught you, like evangelicalism, that women can't, be in ministry, they can't speak. And just hearing those verses like screamed at me,
Right.
like a lot, when it came to just whenever I read the Bible and whenever I was in like certain campus ministry groups,
Mm,
like the more charismatic I got, the more open that they were to having women in ministry. I
sure.
mean, that's de jure, de facto, I still didn't see it being, as
Mm.
they say that it should be.
Right.
Um,
It's interesting. Was that an
yeah.
issue for you? You saying, you're hearing those verses or you're just picking it up. Like, were you sitting there going, this isn't right? Or were you fairly comfortable with that? Because I mean, a lot of people just
I don't know. I think
accept.
I think at that point, because that was what, like 2014 or something, 2013. Um, at that point, I was already like very much like, I don't want to say brainwashed again, but I was just very much, I agreed with a lot of
Yeah.
things, but once it came to like more of the mid years of my college, I started to, I guess, dissect more things because I was in a more charismatic ministry.
Yeah.
Um, and I also started to question certain things that they were bringing up too. Like, I was the person in church that was like, we keep talking about how we want to care for the lost, but we don't really do that. Like,
Mm,
those kinds of things were hard for me to reconcile too.
yeah.
So I was already a little bit like, I guess, not for the status quo of what was happening in church.
Sure.
But I think once they talked about women in ministry, I was like, yeah, okay, if you can read that and like read it in a context where
Yeah.
these verses become different, like, can you do that with homosexuality? Like, pretty
Mm.
much like dove from there.
Yeah. Did you see that there was it was quite a few years ago now, Bree and Beckett Hanan, they were
Yeah,
Bethel students, and they wrote the open letter to Bethel and were like, hey, you taught us to look at the Bible and go, let's not take it at face value, let's look at it, and evaluate, and you taught us with women in ministry passages, if we look at the context, if we break it apart, if we look at
right,
history,
right,
and you can
right,
see women could teach. And can you not acknowledge that this one topic that's only mentioned a handful of times, just like woman not speaking in church was only mentioned a few times, we could look at that in a different context. And even if you disagree, just like you disagree with some people that don't let women speak, that whole thing, they were like, could you see that? And I was like, no, we're not doing it in that area. Like, and so it's just
right,
this kind of, there's this broad spectrum that you could see where it was like, okay, you've got very fundamental churches which won't do it anywhere. And then you have a
right,
few churches that will do it in a few areas. Oh, eating bacon, we'll start making that a bit more acceptable, or, get a tattoo. And then someone's like, oh, maybe we'll let women speak, in church.
right,
And then at a
right,
certain point, someone's like, can gay people hang out? And like,
right,
there's a spectrum, but everyone seems to have this line of like, whoa, we're not reading in context anymore. We're not exploring other ideas. It's just not an option. We're not doing that in
right.
that passage. And it was such a fascinating it, I just thought it was a really well worded letter and very respectful, but just kind of
Mhm.
like, hey, you
I
taught us
heard your
this.
interview with them years back, and I was like,
That was a
wow,
while
this is
back.
like exactly what I felt. Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, I guess in another way, like, Bethel was a little bit part of my transformation too,
Mm,
because Bill Johnson was big on teaching that Jesus is perfect theology, right? And so that made
yeah.
me question like how you view kind of everything that has to do with violence in the Old Testament too. And
Yeah.
then I started reading into that. And once you read into that, there's like no turning back.
Yeah.
Feels like you've pretty much left a lot of what you used to believe.
Yeah, I can see it's fascinating because Bethel gets beat up a lot on, and maybe it
Right,
deserves it for certain things. I'm sure we all do on
right,
some things, right? I'd probably say
right.
a whole bunch of stuff that people. It's my whole podcast. Like man, if they heard me, I'd be a like segment where like, can you believe that guy Phil says this? But it's interesting. Bethel gets quite a hard rap, but it's in some ways it just is what you said, like a stepping stone almost for a lot of people. In that,
Yep.
it does teach certain fundamentals that within its bubble um, are quite radical. Things like people are good at their core,
Mhm,
believing that,
mhm.
like, okay, yes, there was a fall, but actually Jesus redeemed us and we're actually good. So
Right,
taking away that need to be this filthy, awful human being constantly warring with your flesh. I'm like, that's quite a big step for a fairly
right,
prominent
right,
evangelical church
right, and their
or
eschatology too, like, certain things I
yeah,
just
there you
dove
go.
into that took me away from evangelicalism.
Yeah,
So
and
I
then
guess
God always being
yeah,
good. There's
yep,
these kind of like pockets that help. It certainly helped me on my journey. It sounds like it's
mhm,
helped you, but I know many people, and it's funny because it then suddenly becomes oh crap, like because they're then dealing with the consequences of a lot of people going through their process.
right,
Keep going, they keep moving
right,
forward with those. They keep running with the idea, right? And so it becomes
right,
God is always good, and then there's got to be like, oh crap, we need to add a button here somewhere. Right? On some
right.
level, we kind of
How
have
far
to, right?
can
Because
he be good?
but
Right.
there's still a hell, guys. So you can't mess with that or
Right,
whatever,
once you
right?
start reading that in context too, and then, like,
Yeah,
yeah, reading Jesus's perfect theology with the whole Old Testament, you're like, "Well, what the heck do I believe about the Bible anymore?" You know?
yeah.
So
So when did you start doing this kind of like the deep dives into the Bible? Because it's even just hearing you say those things like a lot of people don't have that kind of understanding of the Bible. They do kind of just see the Bible as a fairly at face value text. Maybe they go, oh well, yeah, it's not black and white, you know, there's a bit of nuance here. But it sounds to me like you've been on quite a journey with the scriptures, the Bible, and in figuring
Yeah.
out what you think about it.
So I think it started, a lot of it happened basically in like the same year. But the ministry that I was in, like I remember mentioning some of the stuff I was learning, and it wasn't like received terribly, but it was just basically like ignored, you
Right.
know? Like no one like yelled about it and like kicked me out or anything. It like it just was ignored. And like the person I was dating at the time too, pretty seriously, with the blessing of the ministry, you know, like it was pretty hard for him to deal with.
Mm.
um so I think, and he had a lot of like, I guess just mental health issues. So I think that was already, he was a Calvinist, like to the core,
Wow.
5 points, you know. So it was just hard for him to take that. So it made him like feel worse mentally and everything,
I
emotionally.
bet.
So I just kind of like paused on it and like was quiet about it. And mostly I paused on it. I was quiet, but I mostly paused on it. I'm like, it's okay. I just need to like, you know, maybe go back to the basics and then make sure I'm really where I need to be. And, you know, so I
Mm.
paused on it, I think, for like a year, but I came back to it
Yeah.
eventually. Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic, that, and I find this again and again. I just had Hallie Kim. Are you familiar with Hallie Kim? I've shared her stuff quite a bit on Instagram, so I just assume
Okay. I
everyone that
think
follows
so.
me
It
must
rings a
have
bell.
heard of her. But she's great. But she has some really interesting insights. We talked a bit about some of my recent research and how women go through deconstruction quite differently to men in some areas, and it's really
Hmm.
interesting. You know, we don't have hard data on why, but anecdotally, there's lots of guessing you could do that would be interesting. But one of the things we were talking about is how it, in the church there's this culture, and again maybe less so a little bit in somewhere like Bethel, where they are championing trying to give women more of a platform and allowing them to speak and teach and hold leadership positions. But you mentioned, you know, a Calvinist boyfriend or something like that. Like, there's a problem when you're deconstructing as a female that isn't there as much as when you're deconstructing as a male. When you deconstruct as a male, you ask questions and it's like, wow, you know, yeah, he's, you know, supposed to be thinking and
Right.
intellectual and exploring, and even there's a bit of grace for if they're a bit of a problem and they keep asking questions. There's a bit of a like, wow, that's a manly attribute, that's a masculine. If we're going to pick a gender to associate that quality with, we'll put it with the masculine side, that we at least allow it in the masculine. We don't really like it in the feminine. When it comes up as a strong, independent woman that's asking questions, that's thinking for herself, the tendency is, can we shut this down? Can we ignore it? Can we whatever? But it's intriguing to me that, you know, you felt, I'm going to have to kind of like stick this on the shelf a little bit for a year, you know, that there's
Right.
not a
And I
response. My
wanted to kind of
boyfriend,
test it
the
out too.
church.
Yeah. I was like, am
Sure.
I just learning this? Like, I need to hear every view on this. Like, obviously, I'm hearing all this about, you know, Gehenna and like all these different things. And
Mm,
I just needed a minute, I guess. It just felt like a lot too. So many
yeah.
reasons, but definitely it didn't help that it was just ignored. You know, like I
Yeah.
mostly, I wanted to put it on pause too because I was just overwhelmed, but it definitely didn't help like
Yeah.
talking about it if no one wanted to talk about it.
Yeah. Having this conversation with yourself in the
Yeah.
room, it feels awkward, right?
Yeah, it's like, "Oh, can we talk about this?" And yeah, no one wanted to talk about it.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is full on. Did you feel that having that year pause, that time off to just kind of give yourself a little bit of a space, did you feel that helped with the process? Because I mean, it's a lot to go through, that kind of process of
Right. Yeah,
exploring these
I think
things.
so. I think so. I think it made me, in some ways, I guess, go back to just like why I wanted Jesus in the first place. Like
Mm,
it was him that I wanted, not necessarily like all this other crap that came with it, you know,
mm,
when I converted or whatever. And it made me realize like that is what God looks like, you know, like in all of the world, in every faith, I think it looks like Jesus. So
mm,
like in some essence of God just being good. So so it helped me kind of take a step back and realize, okay, what do I really want, I guess?
mm.
And why was I in this in the first place? But mostly let's be honest, I mostly just shut it down. Like I just didn't think I just thought I was at, and what some people did talk about was me kind of being on the deep end, and I was kind of like, okay, like maybe I am on the deep end and I just don't know what I'm doing.
Mm,
So I partly did believe what was being told to me too.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Did you try and formulate? I've got a few questions and I'm like, which one
Sure.
should we go for?
Yeah.
um I mean, it's just a lot to be going through as well, like, and so I think shutting it down is quite a probably common experience. I know for me at times, and so for my wife at times, we'll start having a conversation. She's like, let's just stop. She's like, I just can't think about this right now. I can't explore this.
It
It's
can be a
just
lot,
too much.
especially in a relationship if someone isn't
Yeah.
in the same place. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think for
absolutely.
the sake of that person too, I felt like I had to shut it down too.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother thing. We could talk about how it was very patriarchal, and we're talking about John Chris now. It's not too far
God.
off from all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that that's an element that's I think often not talked about nearly enough. The
Hmm.
dynamic of how I almost went into this with the podcast I was recording earlier that I guess is going to have come out a couple of days ago by the time this comes out, with Claudine Gallagher, who's post-Mormon mental health, which is a great account. And obviously Mormons and Christians, slightly different, especially if you're a
Right.
Christian, very different.
Right.
But
Yeah.
basically the same kind
Right.
of dynamics at play. But we almost went into it and it just didn't go there. So maybe we should go into it. But like, the dynamic of like, we just don't deconstruct alone. We are so interwoven with all these different people that you don't get the privilege of deconstructing alone when you've got a partner that's going to have an existential crisis, or
Right.
maybe have a position of authority above you and not let you deconstruct,
Right.
or all these different, or maybe you've got loved ones that are going to have, they're going to lose their family member or whatever it might be. Like, it's so it's a complex kind of dynamic that a lot of time when we talk about deconstruction, we talk on a very personal me level. How am I processing it? How will I do it? What things shall I think about? What areas do I explore and theology do I read? We don't often talk about how is this going to affect my loved ones? How am I going to navigate that? Like, it sounds like that was on your mind as well. Is that fair to say?
It was, and obviously there were a lot of things that definitely helped me shut it down, like along with people not wanting to talk about it. I guess because my whole world at that point was Christian. It was like every friend I had,
Yeah.
so you're like, how do I deal with this if I'm saying these pretty
Mm.
heretical things or questioning things, in a way that could be deemed like not okay. Um,
What would have happened
and
with those relationships? Like, when in going back to that moment, maybe now, but back
right,
then, what were you thinking when you're thinking about all these friendships and you're thinking,
right,
well, everyone I know is a Christian. Like, what's the
yeah.
fear? What's the expectations of like, oh, if people knew what I was thinking, or if I did,
Yeah.
keep talking about this?
It is funny how when you become a Christian, like you're encouraged pretty much for the most part to have just that world around you, which
Yeah,
in some ways you look back and you're like, wow, that's like low key cultism. I don't know, but
definitely. That's the word I was thinking. I
yeah.
was like, it's not like hardcore cult, but like low key cult. Perfect.
It's
Yeah,
kind of there. Yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of there.
It's funny.
So like I guess yeah, once you pull off some of the Jenga pieces of your faith, like people are gonna probably start noticing, like, because I
Mm,
was saying some stuff about women, I was saying some stuff about hell and violence in the Bible and contradictions that I had, finally started reading and admitting to. Um, and I think it was easy for people basically to just not listen to me anymore on Facebook or click the unfollow button. And it
sure.
basically,
Yeah.
I wasn't getting, I guess, the traction that I used. Like, I was, in the groups that I was in, I was a ministry leader and all these different things. And after a while, they just stopped,
Mm.
wanting me at certain events or activities. So I was like, okay, I guess that's cool.
Slowly got
Yeah.
iced out, kind of.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, a little bit of an iced out, but I guess once I shut it down and, like, I guess played the part of the status quo. Also, I was going through my own, like physical health stuff too, so I was very much, like, distracted in some ways too. Like,
Sure.
I was just pressing in for healing, I guess,
Mm.
instead of really, um focusing on, my whole worldview falling apart.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, one thing that comes up again and again and again in conversations of deconstruction is life scenarios and things that go wrong, suffering, pain,
Right.
sickness, deaths in the family, divorce, these kind of things can often like spark like us starting to ask questions we hadn't asked before, looking at new things. Like, I know you kind of talk about that, the woman in leadership kind of being like a stepping stone for you. Do you think you would have gone on this journey regardless, or do you think that there were certain catalysts along the way that kind of pushed you
Mhm.
along and helped you?
I, yeah, I think even once I left, once I was done with college and grad school, I was already like basically turning down leadership positions because the questioning was just, it was so hard for me to even be in church for a while.
Mm,
Like even though I was in leadership and I was, praying for people and praying for healing and things like that. I think it was just so hard to be in that environment that I basically said I can't be in leadership because I was required to basically fill up my whole week with things that I just didn't, it was hard for me to like talk about faithfully and honestly. I would
yeah,
basically, I don't know, I guess have a roundabout way of talking about Jesus and like
yeah,
not necessarily the evangelical way anymore. I didn't care if anyone prayed a salvation prayer. I just stopped caring about certain things.
yeah,
So I think it just became harder to go to church and listen to a message and to go to church and be a volunteer.
yeah.
Um, yeah. And so I think things like once I finished college, it was easier for me to just hang out with Christians, but not necessarily go to every event,
Yeah,
um, and go to activities and be part of everything, go to every Bible study. And then once I moved away from Virginia in the last 2 years. Once that happened, I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a heretic because honestly, I've been on this journey,
right.
and like, and once I became sure about everything I did believe, like I did more reading from like every side. Like that was the thing that I think pissed me off the most at church was that they were only presenting one way
Mm,
when it came to like any topic. I think I just really wanted to hear views and why all of these sides could be equally valid, or other sides that we haven't talked
right.
about being more valid. Like
Yeah,
once
absolutely.
I started studying that, once I left Virginia, I was like, okay, I'm just going to start talking about it now, like
Yeah.
openly.
Yeah, I guess there's a kind of fresh slate, like a clean opportunity there as well. I guess you're in the
Yeah,
process of making new friends and establishing a bit of a community as well. So you're
right,
not burning the community you had almost, because that's you've
right.
already kind of on some levels departed from that, I
Yeah, I'm
guess.
starting to do that.
Yeah.
Like, now that I am more vocal online about it versus just, like, here and there, I was pressing some buttons, but now I'm just, I guess, burning down the whole building. Yeah. So, yeah.
That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah.
Um, how did you navigate this on an emotional level? This is a lot of stuff. You're talking about like, disconnecting from church, hanging out with your Christian friends, but like not really going to church anymore, and things
Right.
like that. Like, eh, a lot of people, when they start kind of seeing some of the writing on the wall, and they're like, okay, I think I'm kind of like moving away from kind of a lot of what conventional Christianity looks like. There's
Mhm.
fear of like, yeah, but what if I'm wrong? Or like, oh,
Right.
what if,
That's why I didn't
God's
start
angry
opening
with
up
me?
about
Or
it till I was sure, or,
right.
like, more sure about what I wasn't sure about. What
Yeah.
I know more that I don't really know about. Yeah, let's be honest.
So yeah, once you became sure that you didn't know, or that no
Yeah.
one knew.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
That's funny. So where are you at now? Do you feel like you do have you have some certainty, or just you're more comfortable with the uncertainty, or
I have more certainty and I'm more comfortable with the uncertainty. Like even the certainty that I have, I'm sure that it's more correct than it used to be, but I know it's none of it, is 100%, like nothing at all. It's
mm,
all very loose. My beliefs could change tomorrow,
yeah,
if 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 presented with new information, for sure.
mm,
Um yeah, it's, I don't know how to describe it. I guess certainty is an idol that I used to have that I'm good without. Yeah,
right, yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
it comes to
Would you
everything.
still
But
hold yourself to be a Christian? You'd still kind of frame
Yeah, I
that
still
still?
use that term.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely wouldn't call myself a Pentecostal or an evangelical anymore.
Right.
Like, I still believe in healing and, like God wanting to heal all of us. And, I think, except now I think it's a power that we all have as human beings, not just
Mm,
Christians. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
Wow. So have you explored, you mentioned you started to like kind of look back towards your Hindu roots. Have you explored
mm,
your prior faith, your other faiths outside of Hinduism and Christianity? Is that something that interested you, or did you mostly just look into Hinduism? And what was it in Hinduism that you're starting to kind of go, oh, I like that. I like some of these kind of components.
yeah, honestly, I'm starting to. I guess through Buddhism, I'm learning about Hinduism because
Okay.
there is a connection. Yeah, some of the same writings. But I think I'm going more toward Buddhism for
Yeah.
now, from what I'm learning. Um, I'm probably I'll eventually hit Hinduism. There's just so much to unpack. I'm kind of taking
Yeah.
it one day at a time. I think because I went so quickly, like that one year, I'm just kind of taking it slowly instead of feeling like, okay, I've changed all my beliefs, like, you know, with everything. I think that's what
Mm,
happens with certainty. You think everything has to happen kind of quickly
yeah.
versus I can say this. There's nothing I have to gain or to lose by doing this quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I think that's a great approach, and to come to the place where you don't have to have it figured out immediately, or it's all gonna
Right, right.
crumble
There's
around
not
you or
hellfire on
something.
the other side, so
Right.
there's no rush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God's not sitting there going, "Come on, Sanny, Jesus, I've been
Yeah.
waiting for ages." Um,
Exactly.
what is it in Buddhism that you find so alluring and attractive?
Honestly, a lot of the same teachings as Jesus, which was funny to me. Like
Mm,
almost verbatim, they said some of the same things. If you think these manuscripts are even, like real and something we should
sure.
like agree that it's Jesus, I don't know. Like, but that's part of it. But I think there's this idea of like not being certain of anything and letting your thoughts pass through instead of consume you. And that's
Yeah.
something I remember in Christianity that was really hard. Like obviously, like, you learn about the battlefield of the mind in Christianity. And some of that I still like, I think
Mm,
is true, but I don't know. I think everything I had to believe had to be, there was a pressure for all of it to be correct. And now there's more leniency for it to just pass through me and like for me
mm,
to be okay with it just happening instead of being consumed by something.
yeah. That
Yeah.
is one of the big problems, I guess, with like um, a modern variation of Christianity, like the kind of Pentecostal Protestant variation of Christianity, with it
Hmm.
when it becomes this like belief or faith is like intellectual assent. It's like an ascribing to all the right beliefs or right
Yeah.
doctrines or whatever. Oh man, that's stressful, especially when you
Hmm.
realize, oh gosh, other churches, other groups, other people have slightly different ones. So it's like, well, if this is all about me believing the right ones, well, I need to figure out which one's right, which group of us has got it right. And obviously it'll probably be my group, but like I've got to figure it out, got to figure like, and it's very stressful. It's anxiety driving. I mean, it's a
Hmm.
lot to be living with, constantly going, do I have
Yeah.
it right? Do I
Always
have it
having the
not?
right beliefs. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when it is
Yeah.
natural to have these doubts, these questions pop into your head, and then you have
Hmm.
to face this question of like, do I look at this question, explore it, and go through some sort of crisis and terror and worry that I'm wrong and I'm going to go to hell, or do I kind of just bottle it up and bury it down? Which I think that's a lot of people's defaults a lot of the time.
Right.
But the freedom to suddenly go, oh, let's have a look at that. Like it's okay.
Right,
It's no big
right.
deal. This
Like
is just a
I
journey.
recently just read about Virgin Mary probably not being a virgin, and it's not like the end all for me, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not earth shattering. It's just like, okay, cool. That's
Yeah.
probably true.
We just had it was just on my partners. I've got from the people that donate to me, there's like a partners Facebook group, God, and it creates some really funny conversations here and there, but one person
Mhm.
on the group was like, I just read something about the Virgin Mary, it might not actually be a virgin. What does that mean? Does that mean she cheated on Joseph and she was hiding it? Does that mean like she was raped? Does that mean that like like he's just going through all these points, and he's like, I am like freaking out. Like, what does this mean? And so I just like, well, there's a few different options. The word virgin doesn't even mean virgin.
Right.
That's not even the narrative in all of the Gospels. There's,
Mm-hmm.
who knows?
Or the
Uh,
prophecy about her. Mm-hmm.
right. I mean, there's so many different ways to approach it. But you could still have a deity, human Jesus is still
Right.
there. Don't worry. Don't. It's okay if you really if this is like the pinnacle. If you have an existential crisis, try not to panic too much. You can explore this in your own time. It's not going to
Right.
end everything. But that's the problem when we're so black and white, and when we are like, well, actually, no. One of the things you have to believe is that virgin birth. If you don't believe that Mary was a
Right.
virgin, then everything will cry. Because then you have people that go, oh, actually, I don't ascribe to that one thing, the virgin birth, or I don't believe the Bible is
Right.
inerrant, or I don't believe hell is eternal conscious. And you can say one of these things, and a lot of people are like, well, what's the point? Who cares? I guess you've just
Right.
thrown the whole faith out. And it's like, wow,
All
your
or
all or
nothing.
nothing approach
Mm-hmm.
is really terrifying. No wonder you live stressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
No wonder you're worried about like not everyone getting every single point right, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a terrible way to live, that all or nothing, like absolutism. Or like, hey, let's read this one passage in a non-literal way because it's I don't know, a poem. And it's like, what? If you read one verse non-literal, well, how can you trust anything? And it's like, oh, that's an interesting conclusion, like an interesting, like logical jump. Doesn't
Right.
seem to like add up to me, but like, and I say that probably would have said those same phrases or had those same thoughts 10, 15, 20 years ago. I don't know. But I can imagine I would
Mm-hmm.
have, because I was in that world. But it's gosh, when you're on the other side and you're looking upon people in that framework and they're fighting with you on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram or whatever, hopefully I'm just on Instagram and not in real life. You can look at it and go, gosh, I really am so glad I am not so stressed, so uptight about all these different things.
Right.
Especially the amount of stuff I question. I'm questioning stuff every day, like 10, 20 things come up every day. I would just be like a ball on the floor, just, shaking in a mental asylum or
Paralyzed.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
gosh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
What is real? Are we even here? Are we just some guy's imagination? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just
Yeah.
full blown metaphysical crisis.
Yeah, who
Um,
knows? We could be. And honestly, I'm okay with it now. It's like, okay,
yeah.
I'll probably just laugh through it.
But having some freedom to just go, oh, okay, let's explore that as a thought
Right.
without suddenly going, oh no, my whole world has collapsed.
Right.
It's such a it becomes faith becomes an exploration. It becomes a journey. It's a lot more exciting in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
How have you found all this sort of stuff to because you've just come your last kind of stage, and maybe even partly the stage you're in still to some degree, is charismatic, kind of Pentecostal, that kind of very experiential kind
Hmm.
of stage. Would you say you still have that kind of dynamic in a relationship with God, an experience of experiencing God and things like that charismatics would say is kind of their daily bread almost?
Yeah, I guess in some ways, like, not all of my conversations with charismatics or Pentecostals are like, totally heretical in their eyes. I can probably relate to them on some level.
Mm,
But it's just a lot more spiritual for me now, and I think it's more about every person being included in these promises than just,
mm,
some people with some gifts and some version of the Holy Spirit. And I think it's just God for all. So it's different. um so I do subscribe to a little bit of it, but it doesn't, I don't know. I guess it doesn't matter. I don't define all the terms around it. Like, there's not the pressure to do that anymore. So, but
sure.
I can
Yeah.
relate to them.
Yeah. How do you find people around you? I guess maybe more so your older friends than the new ones that you're making with a bit more freedom to
Right.
start from where you are. Um,
Hmm.
because it's very freeing and liberating to come to this place where you can be yourself. You can kind of articulate things in a lot less of a rigid kind of framework.
Hmm.
um but often people don't like that. um
Yeah.
how have you found people kind of responding to you in that process of learning to be a bit more yourself and open
Yeah.
and
I've only had like two or three friends really very like blatantly come out against certain things I've posted or said,
mm,
and like confront me about it and be like, how you're not the same person I used to know, like. And I basically kind of explained to them I was already deconstructing then,
Mm,
and they're like, well, you have to be a liar then if you were hiding all this. And I'm like, no, I just wasn't
mm,
sure enough, about my unsureness to share. um and
yeah.
I've had one other friend, yeah, just basically telling me that I shouldn't go too far off, because then you're too far off to come back, or I don't know.
Mm,
Yeah, just something along that, those verbs. I don't know.
yeah. It's tough, isn't it? Because you look at it and you're like, I kind of understand it because I guess we have the privilege of having been there,
Right.
possibly even
Mm-hmm.
thought that about friends who went off the beaten path and fell
Right.
away, or like we've thought some of those things, we've had some of the same fears. Like
Right.
you can kind of go, oh, of course, like you're really
Mm-hmm.
worried about me, and I can't
Right.
help you. There's
Right.
no way for me to make you feel safe about me.
Right.
You're worried, but
Right. I
I'm
mean, the
not going to be
least
the
I
thing
can
you
do,
need.
the least I have said is like, I still believe in Jesus. It's just like different now. It's like Christ and all versus, what it used to be.
Yeah,
So there's still some relatability there, but it's okay if it doesn't relate to them. It's,
yeah,
I've kind of eventually learned, like, I'm not here to be there for them, like, I can say what I can say, and
sure.
that's all that matters, if I'm being honest,
Was that a journey you had to go on to learn to, I know for me, like, gosh, growing up, I was like obsessed with how people perceive me, if they liked me, if they thought I was right, wrong, good, bad, whatever. It took me a long time to get to the point where going, oh, wow, you disagree and you're upset about it. Oh, okay. I really tried to be as nice about it, as kind about it, but okay, that's fine.
I'll be
Um,
honest, it's been friendships that I'm not like as close with anyway. So
mm,
like losing it hasn't felt like a huge loss versus the people I'm closer with. I've gone through and explained all of my beliefs to the point where they're like, okay, like she's not crazy. Like
right.
we understand where she's at. Like even if we disagree,
Mm,
like they're okay with it.
that's
And they've
awesome.
kind of started their own deconstruction. So I think
Oh,
it depends on, which friendships I guess I'm not okay with
yeah.
losing, and if I do lose them, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome though. So you found that a lot of your deeper, kind of closer relationships that were able to have those conversations were more accepting, and
Yeah. There's only a
yeah.
few. Only a
Yeah,
few.
well, the closer you get, right, the less
Right.
relationships are in that tight circle. That makes sense. Like,
Mhm.
wow, yeah. And
Mhm.
how is your family kind of engaged with this? Because obviously, you know, you come out of Hinduism into Christianity, and that must have been a big deal for them.
Yeah.
Um, and then now you're kind of like, exploring a bit more broadly. Are you kind of open with them about your faith and where you're at, or has that always been kind of
Yeah.
a bit of a sore spot?
Um,
Or
well, I think since I got saved, I would say it's funny. I feel like I tried to convert them, like for sure. I basically was like colonizing them. Now that I look back on it. But I think because they didn't receive it, like I'll be honest, like my brother got saved and then eventually my mom did. My dad didn't, but my mom still stayed very open. Like when she got saved, for her it wasn't that Jesus was the only way. She just eventually believed Jesus was the best way. So it was
mm,
easy for her to take a fall back once my faith started shifting too, because she started to think like, okay, like it's not about necessarily who's the best or like those kind of absolute terms anymore. And
mm,
she wasn't all the way out to like for that to freak her out. With my brother, since he got saved at 9, I think, since he was so young, right? So
right.
I think for him certain things are still like, if they feel kind of black and white, but I think he's pretty open. I mean, again, he's one of those close relationships that I've talked
Yeah,
to and been more like, this is why I think what I think, and about sexuality and this and that. And honestly, like, he's a pretty open minded person.
that's awesome.
So it's not
Yeah.
been terrible. With my mom, I think it was a little bit more earth shattering because it took her so long to get to the point where she even wanted Jesus.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
You took
But
so long to
she
get her to
wasn't
one
too
day.
far.
You turned
Right.
around,
She
right? Oh, we're
wasn't
going back that
too
way.
far off. Right. Yeah. She wasn't a fundamentalist. So it wasn't
Right.
impossible to be like, yeah, the Bible isn't inerrant. Like,
Mm,
we can talk about this. It never, you know, she was always kind of more of a skeptical person anyway.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you've been very fortunate in a lot of ways in your relationships. Because I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of people have very close relationships and they don't go as well, and they do kind of like there's a lot of tension there, and people stop connecting with them and sharing. You know, they'll cut them off, or and so it's quite awesome that you have had a few friends that are going, no, we want to hear you out. Some have even kind of started to join you on the journey, maybe, and others have gone,
Right.
well, we disagree, but we're happy to kind of tag along, and family members to be okay, cool, you know, like that's cool, maybe slightly different, but yeah. um that sounds really great,
Yeah,
you
I've
know,
had
in a
a
lot of
really
ways.
good experience.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah, I
awesome.
haven't really been abused by church or anything like that. So I've definitely been on the fortunate, like I've gotten the good end of the stick for sure.
Yeah. And I,
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that, because I think often the most vocal often talk about some of the worst things, or even something
Right.
like my experience at church has been relatively okay. I mean, I got some stories personally that I could tell, but most
Right.
of my stories I can tell you about how terrible the church is because I talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people,
Right.
and usually they're the people that were hurt. And so I'm like, okay, of course I've got this kind of different
Right.
color,
I
the
know
whole
other
thing.
people's stories. Mine
Um,
is not one of those bad stories.
yeah, and
Like
I'm not
I
saying
just
that
went
you've had
through.
an easy pass or anything like that. Like
Mhm.
everyone's story is their story, and everyone's ups and downs of their ups and downs, right?
Mhm.
But I think it is important to remember that, you know, a lot of people haven't had such a traumatic, horrific experience at deconstruct. In fact, probably most people at deconstruct had a relatively normal Christian experience, but probably just went a little too deep. They looked a little too close, and that maybe they asked the question a little too far, and
Yeah.
they started to realize, oh my gosh, some of the answers I'm finding out. You know, like it wasn't that, you know, the pastor abused them, or, you know, some of the more extreme examples that
Right.
do
Right.
occur, but
Mhm.
that's not the most common reason someone deconstructs. You know, it's usually kind of a much more um, gradual process of like, no, I'm just really trying to learn. I'm exploring
Yeah.
Calvinism. I'm exploring charismatic. Oh, Bethel, that looks interesting. I'll look into that. Oh, woman, interesting. Woman can teach. You know, and it's
Yeah.
this kind of like just a gradual slippery slope.
Mhm.
And the problem is, of course, the slippery slope looks different for different people, right?
Yeah, it does. It
You know,
really
some people
does.
were over like trying to stop you asking one kind of philosophical question, and they didn't even think to stop you looking at women being able to teach, and that was the one that clicked for you and kind of got you rolling down the hill, the slippery slope.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. So what are some, because now I've noticed in the last, like, I don't know how long, probably like last few months really, I've noticed you becoming a lot more vocal on Instagram. You mentioned, you know, since moving you've been kind of doing that. What is it that you're doing, and why are you doing it, and what, you know, what are you saying, and what's going on?
Well, um I don't know. I would say what's happening in the world right now was like a spark. I think what's happening in the political world right now is also a spark to
Mm,
realize, hey, there's some roots in what we believe in the churches we go to in like white supremacy. And I realized if I don't speak up for that, then I'm also part of the problem, you know,
mm,
even as like a person of color, you know, like I'm part of the problem if I don't speak up and say like, hey, like if we can't neglect the church's dark history, we can't neglect the Bible's dark history and how we've used it and abused it, you know.
mm,
So I think that was kind of a catalyst for me of to just say, hey, this is not okay anymore.
yeah,
Um and yeah, kind of doing what Jesus did and speaking up for the marginalized.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Are those kind of things that you were fairly passionate about before your deconstruction, or, you know, you mentioned
Yeah.
certainly
Yeah.
before, and
I would say since the election of, you know, our president, I think I was always I became more vocal at that point. I was always kind of moderate. And then I think what it means to be a Christian now is just so weird and warped and Americanized
mm,
that I've kind of been like, this isn't what a Christian has to be. Um,
sure,
so it's made me more vocal. But I think in the last few months with Black Lives Matter and people not wearing masks, you know, just for themselves, certain things I'm just like, I don't, why are the Christians the ones on the wrong side of history here and, you know,
yeah.
choosing the selfish thing?
It's
instead
really
of the
tough, isn't
selfless
it?
thing.
Sometimes when you're like, does it have to be us? Do we have to be the ones?
Yeah.
Why are we? I mean, whether people associate with Christianity or not, I'm not sure many people would be happy to label me a Christian, but I don't know. It's my heritage.
Sure.
It's where I'm from. So
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh, come on, guys. Like, really? Jesus would be like, no, I'm going to go the selfish route over the selfless route. Really? You know?
Yeah. Mhm.
That's tough. It's really tough. So what's your do you have a focus then? Are you kind of focusing mostly on kind of race politics? Is, you know, I've noticed you've got a lot of
I'll
theology
I'm
in there.
staying mostly in my lane. Like race is not the thing I'm most familiar with. I
Mm,
would say like theology, like I've been taking some classes at Yale for theology and Bible history,
okay,
like just for
nice.
fun. Like it's probably the thing I'm more passionate about and where I've stayed, like mostly in when it came to my deconstruction. But
Mm,
I do mention it, because I am a woman of color and it does
yeah,
affect me. Um, but I definitely leave it to the people that like know their stuff.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think I think that's as a white person, but I think it's something that um, I can imagine being really frustrating. I remember a few years ago, I was talking to a guy that I met at a conference, and he happened to be a gay guy in America, and he was speaking at a round table about how to help churches become more affirming of LGBTQ community.
Hmm.
And I asked him like, um, what is it that frustrates you the most when you're dealing with this topic and working it and things like that? And he's like, the thing that frustrates me the most, and like he literally was came to tears. He says, I don't really want to talk about this shit. He's like, I love storytelling and myths and mythology and how we craft narratives to give ourselves meaning and create purpose and create a faith in God and how God is found in narratives. He's like, that's what I wish people would ask me about, not go, oh, you're a gay guy. What do you think about gay stuff? You know, or whatever. And I
Right.
think there is an element and I've tried to walk that line where I don't want to presume that someone that is a person of color only wants to talk about race. Someone that is,
Right.
trans only wants to talk about trans matters. Like, but at the same
Hmm.
time, obviously, going, you're clearly one of the experts on this just by your being on some
Right.
level. But it's maybe not your wheelhouse. It's not what you're passionate about, what you want to do, what you want to focus on. And I think so. I applaud you as well of not feeling you have to on some level,
Hmm.
whilst being active and going, hey, this is, who I am and I should
Right.
speak up about this occasionally. And so what is it in that kind of world? You mentioned you taking some courses in Yale of kind of Bible history. Was that what you said?
S- I guess that's the general gist of all the classes, but there's many. Like right now I'm going through one that focused mostly on just the works of Bart Ehrman,
Okay, nice.
just yeah, just different things of just his evolution and
Mm,
the Jesus traditions and um yeah, those kind of talks in the Jesus tradition meetings and going
mm,
through their different disputes and how they all disagree. Yeah.
yeah. How are you finding that? Because, Bart's very, very positive towards Christians, very friendly towards Christians. He has no desire to talk Christians out of being Christians. He's very vocal about that and consistently says that. And yet, at the same time, he is an extremely persuasive guy who presents a lot of stuff that would cause a lot of Christians to tremble.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff in there where you go, oh, shit, that might be a biggie.
Right.
There's definitely stuff in his works which is fantastically done.
Right.
I don't have anything negative particularly to
Right.
say that can be very challenging as someone that's still holding on to a lot of her Christianity. Is that the case for you? Or are you enjoying it? Are you finding it
No,
hard?
I'm
Or
enjoying it. I think I had already heard of some of his works before that. So, kind of like the thought that passes through that you just acknowledge and work through rather than like it
mm,
shatters my whole world and my worldview and everything I am. It's not
mm,
really like that anymore. And even going to the Jesus tradition classes, like, oh, like a lot of these manuscripts probably not true, like
mm,
it's not earth shattering, I guess, anymore. It does make me wonder, like, what can we trust? But that's okay.
Yeah. So what do you do with this? So, I mean, for people that are listening, there'll be a wide variety of people that have
Mm,
different understandings and engagements with that. Why don't we talk about that a little bit if you're up for it? Because I think this is
sure.
really interesting and a lot of people might find interesting. We might cause some people to sit in the corner crying at the end of the podcast. I don't know. Um,
Oh,
but,
yeah.
um, when you're saying something like, oh, wow, the Jesus tradition, some of this the manuscripts might not be authentic or maybe the narratives were fabricated to present things a certain way, or
Right.
like how talk to me about how we know that those things, because that'd be the first objection people would have, would be like, wow, no, like we've got 25,000 copies of the gospels and it's clearly like, and there's all sorts of the case for Christ kind of arguments or whatever. But from what you've kind of been learning, like is it fairly safe to say that we don't know black and white, oh yeah, this stuff that's mentioned in the gospels, the Jesus tradition, it absolutely happens? Like why can we say that, that we don't know certain parts, or that some parts might be fabricated?
So you're asking if I agree or
Yeah, well, I guess maybe just frame the argument first, and then maybe you could throw your weight in of whether you agree with it or not. But just so some people maybe, or I guess I could if you'd be more comfortable. But
I mean, I just started the classes, but I
right.
guess my thoughts are a lot of it feels very politically put in there, you know?
Mm,
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how the canon came about, it sounds like too. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's not an end all for me. So it's not something I stress about.
Right. What is
Yeah.
it that you don't? Why is it that you don't feel so worried about stuff? Because to a lot of Christians, I mean, you start talking about the Bible and you go, well, yeah, okay, so we can look at the Bible and we go, okay, it's not inerrant. It's not like, the word of God. The word of God was Jesus. It's fine. Like,
Mm,
and that's a hard pill for a lot of Christians to swallow, but some of them will go with you and kind of get there and go, yeah, okay, foundation, Jesus, not the Bible. The Bible is kind of interpreted through Jesus.
right.
Great.
And then you mess with Jesus,
Right.
right?
And then you go, okay, yeah, but some of the stories we have about Jesus probably made up. And then suddenly they go, it's the all or nothing, right? So then it's suddenly like, wow, if you can't, if they made up the virgin birth story, if he didn't really say that bit in the, Luke, whatever, like, how can we trust any of it, And
Right.
does any of that occur in you when you explore this? Does any of you go, oh my
Um
gosh, how do we even know then? Like, it just feels like, oh, what's the point
I
of even trying to
guess
figure
I
this out?
guess yeah, I feel like maybe I'm in a safer place when it comes to handling that new information because um for me, I guess I've already concluded that, God is like within all of us and that's the access we have to him. So I
Mm,
feel like much safer being like I don't need to necessarily read these things about Jesus to get my foundation.
yeah.
But I
Okay.
know for a lot of people, like they're like, okay, just Jesus. Like, wait, no, no, just Jesus. We don't even know what just Jesus is. I know that's difficult. I do honestly wish I knew what to trust. That
Mm,
would be nice. It doesn't mess with me a ton, but I would say I take every bit of the Bible now with like a grain of salt.
mm,
Yeah. Because
yeah.
I just don't know. I can get meaning from it, sure, just like any other reading, any other ancient text. I
Yeah.
think I would just leave it there. Like, I wouldn't go as far as like, okay, like this is everything, or even just the Gospels, those are everything.
Mm. Yeah, it's a real can of worms, isn't it? When you start opening it up and you start looking and going, oh, Paul didn't write all these letters, huh? And then you go,
Yeah.
oh, actually, like half the letters in the gospel in the New
Yeah.
Testament weren't written by who they said they were, and then you go,
Mm-hmm.
oh, the gospels, none of them were probably written by the people we say that person is. Maybe someone called Matthew wrote it, but not the Matthew we're talking about, or like, and so you start like going, it's a very disabling process, I can imagine, for a lot of people. And I guess it probably is one I generally, when people start asking me questions about this, my default is, do you want to talk about this? Do you really want to look at this? Or are you kind of just wondering and wanting to backpedal? Because if you want to backpedal, I'll give you an out now before I recommend any books, or, before
Yeah.
you dive in too deep. Because I do feel like there is some sort of like, I don't like to be prescriptive and say there's a mapped out journey people should go on, but it feels like before you start looking at this, you should at least have deconstructed what you think the Bible is, and maybe,
Yeah.
how
I mean, if this
important
is where
that
you start your
is.
deconstruction, I think you would basically be an atheist,
Yeah, I mean, in a blink of an eye, almost,
Yeah.
right?
Like if this is where you start, you may be an agnostic, I don't know, but like
Mm,
you wouldn't be able to call yourself a Christian anymore.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, you probably wouldn't believe in much of anything. I don't think you would be okay with religion in general after this,
yeah.
after reading these Jesus traditions and what probably isn't in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So cursory word of warning to anyone listening in,
Yeah.
maybe don't start with Bart Ehrman. You know?
Yeah, maybe don't start with him or like, go through commentary on the Gospel of Thomas or Enoch or
Yeah.
something. Cause yeah, you'll be like, what? Like, why isn't this in there? Or what should be in there?
Yeah.
It'll
Have
fuck with
have
your head a
you
little.
read much kind of extra canonical kind of stuff in your studies?
Only a little bit so far. I'm a little bit behind on my reading, to be
Okay.
honest. There's just so much I want to read.
That's my life
But
motto,
only a
behind
few
on reading.
books. Right. I heard that they have their books out now on Mary Magdalene.
Mm,
I really want to look into that and the things that she
yeah.
wrote. So
Yeah, no, there's some really interesting stuff out there for sure. What are your thoughts on things like that? Just, I guess, like you were saying, like kind of any ancient wisdom is wisdom to be garnered, to dive into.
right.
Um, yeah, I guess interesting. I can't answer my question as soon as I asked it. I was like, oh, yeah,
Yeah,
you already said that.
I'm like, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So you mentioned like any ancient wisdom. Is there like a timeline? You gonna hit like a certain date, like 349 AD, you're out. There's no more wisdom, or do you do you do you
I
see
mean,
wisdom in beyond kind of the ancient kind of religious texts?
mm,
Um,
um I think eventually I might hit a point where it's like this is history rather than like ancient
mm,
wisdom. But I mean, but I do that already with some of my readings.
yeah,
Um it'll just depend. I have no set or fast answer on that.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. So
Yeah.
what's next? What are you hoping to be tackling over the next kind of like few weeks, months, as you're posting about stuff and looking at? Are you quite reactionary? Like you talk about more kind of current things that you're going through, or that's politically kind of relevant, or do you have a kind of timeline in mind? I'm going to kind of talk about this and then I'll go to this.
Yeah, I think I'm going to I don't know. I think I put a comment out a month ago or 2 months ago on someone's post on deconstruction. I think it was John Steingard. Stein.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, him. And all of a sudden, like people were messaging me and wanted to hear what I thought. And all of a
That's
sudden, I
awesome.
was like, okay, like maybe I'll start talking about this more instead of
Mm,
just random stuff. So I think from here, it sounds like I'm gonna maybe start making some posts about like this is sexuality or purity culture and like um or I don't know, like spiritual abuse or patriarchy, just hitting different topics, I think.
yeah.
um Post by post, I haven't done any of that right now. It's just been in my stories, just my
Right.
thoughts, like out there in the universe.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
I
but I
live in
think
the
I'll be more
stories, so
intentional.
I guess that's why I've seen something like I basically never have time to go start scrolling on a feed. There's so many stories, it's just endless. So by the time
Mm.
I've seen a few, I'm like, I need to get off Instagram. I'm swallowing up my day.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I
I
guess
do
that's
that
why I'm
too.
not aware that you're not doing this on your profile.
Yeah, it hasn't been a lot on my
Mm,
profile. I think maybe here and there you might understand, like, okay, she's deconstructing, like, but
mm,
it's all pretty much on my story. On my Facebook, it's everywhere, but mostly related to political stuff, just because
yeah,
my audience is all evangelical.
right.
Um, right. But on Instagram, it's different. It's like a
Mm,
different audience, so I haven't been like that. But I think now I'll post more, just more straight theological stuff.
yeah, that's cool.
um yeah, I don't have a crazy plan, but my friend did mention doing a podcast with me. He's Catholic, but he's
Oh wow.
very much a critique of the Catholic Church.
Okay.
So I think that would be really
Yeah.
interesting because I don't know a ton on Catholicism, honestly.
Yeah, no, me neither
I
particularly.
just
So,
know what the evangelicals have told me, which
oh,
is all bad,
they're
right? So,
evil, not really Christian,
right,
terrible. Yeah.
worship Mary,
Oh yeah,
right?
they
And
they
like,
just spend
yeah.
their whole time worshiping, singing songs to Mary and praying to her. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so I'd
That's
love
funny.
to, I guess, hear him like critique and love the Catholic Church like he does.
Mm,
So that'd be cool.
yeah.
So he's mentioned that, and so we'll see. Nothing crazy planned, but I do want to be more intentional about making posts now that I'm in a place where I'm like, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm vocal with the people closest to me, so now I'm just gonna go forward.
Yeah. No, it sounds great. I mean, what you have to say and what you're saying is good stuff. I enjoy it. Like every time I see it pop up, I'm like, oh, cool. I'll go check this out. And it's great. It's good stuff. I think the way that you put things across is brilliant. You're really articulate in the way that you kind of sum up some of these complex things that you've, received from who knows where and over time and developed, but it's obviously percolated in your head in a way that when it comes out, it's put so well.
I'm glad
I
it makes
really
sense
appreciate it.
because I'm
So
always worried that I'm like, I don't know if this makes sense to anyone, and let alone me
that's funny.
typing. I'm such a terrible typer. My thumbs are too big,
Oh
and yeah.
yeah. I hear you. Mine might be profound, but it has the worst typo somewhere, and then it suddenly becomes like the ravings of a
That's
madman.
totally me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely me.
People are like, Phil, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, I reread it and I'm like, oh God damn it, the phone. Why does my phone screw me over at every opportunity?
Oftentimes I write Bible and it just ends up being like bubble,
Yeah.
Buble, like with a
The
U
bubble
instead.
is
I don't know
not the word of God.
why.
No, I
Yeah, and
agree.
I'm like,
Yeah.
people are like, what? I'm not doing anything. I guess I'm not shaking anything crazy up by saying that, but okay.
Yeah. That's funny. That's really
Yeah.
funny. Wow. So you mentioned sex, purity culture, stuff like
Oh
that. Is
yeah.
I mean, you got saved at 15, right? And you get straight into like
Right.
the Christian church. Like,
Yeah, I had a purity ring. I did
wow,
all of that.
nice. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for a long time.
Did you send it into Nadia Boltz-Weber for her statue?
No, I didn't know she had one. That's so funny. She's amazing. I haven't read actually a lot of her stuff, but the
Oh,
more I
right.
write about things, I realize like people send me stuff and I'm like, oh, we believe the same thing. That's so cool.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Did you see what she did with all the purity rings she
No, what
collected?
did she do?
Oh, she had everyone send them the purity rings. She melted them all down and made them into a giant statue of like female genitalia, right? I mean, just a massive like
Love that.
vagina right there on a statue. Absolutely amazing. Just hilarious. I mean, I don't know.
Where is the statue? You
I
said where?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. Where is she? Because she was in
She's
California.
in the
Now she's
South,
in.
I thought.
Yeah, like I'm not sure where she is now.
Okay.
Tennessee? I don't know. I have no idea. But
I
yeah,
knew she
you
was
should
like in the Bible Belt, so
go
I
Google
knew
that
everything she was
when we
saying.
finish up,
Okay.
and you'll die of
Okay.
laughter because it's hilarious. Because it works on so many levels. It's empowering. It's awesome. It's like in some level, like redeeming something that's been so awful. But
Yeah.
also on a whole nother level, it just trolls a whole group of people in a really funny
Gotta
way.
love the trolling.
A
Yeah.
little bit, right? A little bit low key trolling. So maybe probably still not okay, but
I try not to
fine.
do too much of it. It can come off as rude and people
Oh,
will misunderstand
I
that I'm
know.
actually teaching something,
I have to try and avoid it because I'm really bad. Yeah, a bit too.
I'm
So
I'm a little too tongue in cheek. When I do it, it comes off kind of bad.
yeah, well, I'm just too deadpan. People think I'm serious sometimes. I get the amount of people that message me and go like, "Why would you say that?" Like I can't remember. I was say like like, "Well, women are property, aren't they?" And they're like, "Phil, I've been following you for 4 years. I can't believe you believe
Why
that."
are
And
you
I'm like,
saying this?
"What?
Yeah.
How have you?" Yeah.
Yeah. You have to have some emojis after that so they
Oh,
know.
geez. Yeah, like a little wink or roll eyes or
Yeah.
something. I know. I need to
Yeah.
use the emojis more. Actually, that's why most of what I write is riddled with emojis because of that. I'm like
You
worried people don't
should.
get what I have.
Yeah.
So what, you mentioned that's something you're talking about right now. Is that something that you have shifted in quite a bit from your kind of like upbringing and
Yeah.
where you're
I
at
mean,
now, what you think about the culture?
so even in Hinduism, like I mean, I don't want to speak completely for Hinduism because I'm
Mm,
not as well versed on that as like people like my family or and I will hopefully eventually learn more into it, but the culture I'm from definitely valued a woman's virginity and purity
Mm.
too. So going from that into like, you know, getting saved and reading Joshua Harris, like it was an easy transition because
Right.
they basically believe the same thing, you know. Except like even more, you couldn't hug normally, you know, just like even more things that I'm
Right.
like,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
this is another world. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, that
Huh.
Joshua Harris book. I read that with my first girlfriend. And I
Really?
remember, yeah, I remember thinking that's not going to happen at all. Sorry.
I'm glad you felt that
I mean,
because I don't know,
yeah,
everyone
I
I
mean,
was
still
around
no
was
sex before marriage or whatever. But like, I
right.
mean, are you kidding? You're gonna like call her parents to say, "Hey, I have noticed your daughter doesn't sound creepy at all, and I intend to marry her one day. Could I court her for the purposes of preparing to marry her?" Like, when I'm like, "What is this? This is so
Right.
creepy." And then not only that, when you start court, you don't like there's no progression on any physical level at all. It's like
Mhm.
nothing, and then progression on emotional,
Having sex.
spiritual level, and then
Right.
at some point you go, all right, all in now,
Right.
100%, and expecting there to be no problems with that at all. Everything's going to be completely fine. Like, I just like that doesn't feel right. So I was also Christian. It was like, well, no, there's a hard line, but where is that line, and how close could I get to it? And could I just like walk along the line? Like,
Yeah,
so
I
yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean, I'll definitely be talking more about purity culture and how it
Mm.
affected me in my last relationship with that boyfriend too. But I mean, oh my gosh. I remember reading that book because a lot of our youth group like read it just for like for fun, which I thought was odd. But
A
I read
barrel
it
of
like
laughs.
very yeah, I'm like, what? Okay. I read it and I remember thinking like, okay, we can't take like this too seriously because that it doesn't seem, I don't know. I didn't take it. I liked one or two things from it and that's pretty much all I took from it. But I did do the purity ring and
Hmm.
um yeah, I wasn't even aware that it was purity culture. Like that term to me is more recent than
Right.
all
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's a thing. Like, I guess I was part of it and I didn't even
Yeah.
know it, you know? Like I wore the purity ring and I
Yeah.
waited a long, long time.
Yeah. Well, it feels
Yeah.
like it's only people outside of it that look upon it and go, "Oh, the purity culture." Like nobody in there really realizes they're in
Right.
like
No
this
one
weird
knows.
kind
They're
of
just
like
like,
little
oh,
bubble.
I'm just, true love waits. Like this is
Hmm.
what you do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
look, I've got the True Love Waits Bible. I've got my purity ring from the massive, like, millionaire, like multi-millionaire company that sells purity rings. Um,
Yeah.
like, what a great idea that was for that guy. It's got like Proverbs 31 etched on it or something because
Yeah.
about not sleeping together. I don't know. It's like explaining
I
what
don't
a
even
good
know. There was
wife
a
is.
verse on there,
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a weird world for sure. Like, and not really overly outside of, well, historically, yeah, this is how we operated. Like, women were property. Their value was in their ability to
Right.
bring up a child, to tie families together, etc. Like, so obviously you needed to be virgin to prove that that child was going to be your child, and like blah 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 blah. Like, you've got all these different components historically in the Bible, but like, there's nothing in the Bible particularly saying like, oh, when you date a girl, don't sleep with her, because no one dated, and like, no one slept around,
Right.
because it's just, or if they did, it was definitely done very differently.
Mhm.
It's a weird thing to be such a big deal. Like, was it a big deal, this kind of purity culture, looking back, like, for you
There were
guys?
definitely yeah, I definitely heard more about it, like, in youth group. I mean, it was hard for me to even wear those rings because they always turned my finger green. So, like,
the
just in general, I
multi-million dollar company making these beauty rings apparently cutting some corners.
yeah, I was like, "What the heck?" Like, they never fit, and they're always, like, turning my finger green. Um
That's funny.
Yeah, so I
Oh.
was already a critic from the beginning, but I did follow like purity culture, like in like, watched what I wear. And to this
Mm,
day, it's still weird to like run around in a sports bra or like wear like a strap.
wow.
Yeah, it's still I guess still triggers me in some way and it still has some effect on me. you know, and even though like all those verses about your brother stumbling have everything to do with meat served to idols, so weird to compare us to meat, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it still kind of affects me, I would say, like even now being like part of healthy sexuality or growing in that, like
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
would definitely talk about it.
Yeah, you should. Like, I think the more people that can talk about it, the better, because it
Yeah,
is
and
messy. Like you said, like the holdovers from that, something as simple as, yeah, just being able to dress the way you want to dress without going, oh no, like I'm not allowed
yeah,
to dress.
and in
That's
every other
I'm
facet and
inappropriate,
circle of
or
life, that's abusive. Like telling a woman
oh,
how to dress is abusive.
absolutely, right?
But like they don't call it that. They're like, oh, it's for your brother. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, interesting. Like, I
It's not
mean, we
even
can stumble
framed for your
too.
benefit either. It's not
Yeah.
even like, like they're like it's the weakest argument even. It's just like,
Right. And
oh yeah,
it's
you
not
have to do
even
this
Jesus's
for their
argument.
benefit.
Like, yeah, it's the opposite of Jesus's argument. So
That's crazy.
I'm sure I'll have a lot to say when that comes around. And every other facet of life, these kinds of things would be abusive,
Mm,
but we've put like a spiritual thing, a God stamp on it. So we're okay with it.
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
No, that's really, really, it's good. We need more people talking about us for sure. I've got tomorrow I'm filming a podcast with Linda K. Klein. Have you come across her? She wrote a book called Pure. Pretty sure it's Pure. So I'm excited to talk about that, because I think we'll go a bit deep into purity culture and stuff like that. I'm hoping we do. I don't know. Maybe we'll end up talking about God knows. I never know.
Yeah, who
But yeah,
knows? It'll turn
um,
into a lot of things.
that's good. Well, Sanny, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing a
Mhm.
bit of your journey, your story, like what that was like for you. I think it's always really interesting to just talk to different people from different backgrounds on what deconstruction has looked like for them, why it's gone the way it's gone, how they've processed it, how they've managed it. If people want to start tracking with you as you start ramping up, doing some more stuff online, where can they kind of follow you and connect with you?
So Instagram is probably the best.
Okay.
My Instagram is dechurched_girl.
Nice. I noticed
Yeah,
you just changed that?
I did. I was like, you know what? If I'm going to start posting more of this, I may as well just change the name. It's not even
Yeah.
about my personal life anymore. I'm just posting only this. Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, I
Yeah.
noticed that the other day. I was like, huh, you always been called that? I don't think you have. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
funny.
I was like, let's keep it simple and on topic.
That's good. Like, that's obvious. If I'm de-churching, I go, huh, you're someone to follow.
Yeah.
And so that's good. Really good idea. So Instagram's the best place for people to connect with you.
I would say so.
Perfect.
I'm on it all the time, so I'm
Yeah,
also
me too.
nocturnal, so I'm on it all the time.
I
Yeah.
do notice we message quite a bit, and I have noticed that because I always message at weird times. I stay up really late. I mean, it's
Mm.
I don't know what time it is, like it's almost 1 or something probably.
Right.
So I stay up to about 3 in the morning because I work with people in like Pacific time
Right.
or further. But I also end up like texting people really early and doing things. And I'm like, you are always like randomly, we don't talk that much, but when you do text me, I'm like, I can't get a handle on where you are in the world. I know where you are in the world, but I'm like, you text at
I
weird
do like to
times.
travel, but I do just have a weird schedule. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah,
That's
my
really
work
funny.
lets me work whenever, so that's nice, but it
That's the
means I
dream.
sleep whenever. It is.
Yeah,
It's nice.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Really appreciate you coming on. I'll make
Yeah.
sure that we get that link in the show notes and hopefully send some new people your way.
That'd be
If
cool.
people enjoyed it, send Sanny a message and let her know that you love the podcast. But yeah, I'm sure we'll chat in the next few days. Probably finish this and chat in the next hour, probably at some point. But yeah, I really enjoyed having you on. Really enjoyed getting to know you a bit better as well and hearing your story in a bit more depth.
Yeah, this is cool. I've followed you for a long time, so I'm like, this is gonna be so fun, and we're finally gonna talk, not
Yeah.
over message.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot easier. I tell you what, as an introvert, I do like texting a lot. This is why I
See,
do what I do. So
you said that you're an introvert, but I'm like, you seem like the least introverted introvert I've ever met.
I'm very good. I'm very good at like switching on, and then I'll
Hmm.
go and like read for 4 hours to recharge, So we'll
Okay,
get to
that
bed till
makes
like 5 a.m. But
sense. Yep, that's me too.
awesome. Well, Sally, thank you so much. I hope you have a good rest of your day. It must be getting late where you are, actually, is it? Coming into the evening, isn't it?
It's
Yeah.
only 5:30 here.
Yeah.
About
Awesome.
5:30.
Well, enjoy your
It's not
evening.
bad.
For sure.
All right.
All right. Love you,
See
Sanny.
ya.
I'll catch you later. Yeah. Bye.
See ya.